On this week's show, Jim Meacham from Altura Associates and Doug Plumley from Dartmouth College are here to talk about what actually happens when IT and OT teams are told they got to work together. Where do they misunderstand each other from day one? And when IT security and OT security both want different things, how do you write a policy that both sides can actually live with? I'm Ryan LaFlamme, and this is How to Handshake, Episode 4. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Douglas, for joining us today. And we're talking OT and IT convergence here. I'd just like to quickly start by going around the room and having you guys introduce yourself. Let us know who you are and what you do. Jim, we'll start with you.
Perfect. Great to be here. Thanks, Ryan. Jim Meacham. I'm one of the founding principals of Altura, and my background is in building automation and controls. I actually started in industrial automation many years ago, but I've been in the building space for about 23 years now and do a lot of energy efficiency and commissioning work, which got us deep into the building automation space as it is. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things these days. So excited to be a part of the conversation.
And Doug, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Doug Plumley from Dartmouth College. I'm a software architect on the campus services technology services team. It's quite a mouthful. So we're an embedded IT team in our campus services division. Campus services is comprised of dining, facilities, auxiliaries such as a skiway, really runs the gamut, daycare, childcare included. We run between 70, 80 different applications for those various groups. A large part of that is our integrated automation program, and part of that is building automation, utilities, plants, et cetera. So we run typically the IT infrastructure for that, the application layer, and increasingly we've gotten more into the networking side of it with things like BACnet and really helping to architect that to scale on an enterprise network like ours.
And Ping, once again, hello.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jim, Doug. Thanks for joining us. Pleasure to be here. This topic is near and dear to me. It's basically how I started with optical networks. So yeah, let's dive into this one.
And for listeners who have seen, terms like IT, OT convergence in headlines, but really haven't had the time to sort of dig into what that means. I think you two are probably really great representatives. What do you think that actually means? What are people actually describing in a day-to-day building when they're talking about the convergence of IT and OT?
I'll jump in there just from my perspective on this. Yeah, it's been a fun ride over the last 20 years to think about this. And my personal opinion is it's all IT is what I often say. Like OT sometimes to me is a term that can get in the way of the coordination that actually is happening, needs to happen, because it really is about, getting information across your networks is an IT thing, regardless of what system that is these days, right? So in the classical sense, of course, operations technology, right? It's your control systems, your anything related to the operation of the facility, falls in that bucket. But there's a lot of gray area too of what is ops tech and who owns it. And so this conversation is meaningful in that regard of how do we get these groups to talk better and interface in a way that actually accomplishes the outcome. But at the end of the day, it's all IT, because it's going to end up on that network. And we don't want stranded networks that aren't managed with a high degree of cybersecurity and these things, right? So that's the old school, stranded facility OT networks that were managed by, operating engineers with all kinds of cyber risk that they owned. Let's get that to the people who can actually manage that risk and manage those devices and networks.
I would echo that and say yes. I think the key piece is it's technology, right? So we've often talked about OT, IT like they're different things, but to Jim's point, they've been computers for a very long time. Pneumatics, I think, have been on their way out for a little while, right? And I don't know past the pneumatics point at which things switched over to being computers, but when we say DVC, a lot of these things are commodity microprocessors, microcontrollers, and now increasingly they actually have CPUs like the layman like us can recognize. Oh, that's ARM, that's Intel, that's AMD, right? So they've ceased to be purely OT, where there's a dividing line, like they're definitely not IT, right? They've been computers for a very long time. And the reality check is they run code just like any other computer does. The difference is really the means in which that code has been implemented on them. And so I think the convergence we're talking about here is that it's also predominantly the network technologies that's being used. IP1 quite a while ago. This industry is now catching up to that fact, that reality. So I think we're seeing a convergence of network technologies. We're seeing a convergence of stopping treating OT like it is something other than IT for computers. And we're starting to see the benefits of it as well. So the big challenge to me in treating things like OT isn't that, oh, you get this magical uptime. It's in a lot of ways, you're actually getting more downtime because IT over the years with like roles like an SRE, site reliability engineer, we're measuring things to 5 nines, as far as their uptime and capabilities. And we need to take that mentality and that engineering skill set and apply it to this industry and get the economies of scale as well, because this industry could build things like that, but it would be enormously expensive. Now, IT is commoditized that, really.
I'd like to add to everything that Jim and Doug said there. If I can borrow from the cybersecurity world, we think of cybersecurity as 3 things: the technology, the product, the thing that you can buy and install. There's a process that governs it, and then there's people. I'm going to wrap that in the 4th layer around the business objectives. I'm telling you all this because I think one of the biggest difference that's happening now, that matters to IT and OT convergence is that not long ago, OT's people were very different. There was a department, and we still have that. The process and procedure, the documents, there was within that. The budget had its own budget. Now we're seeing a lot of gray area. We're seeing people like Doug, who straddles both IT and OT, right? We're starting to see a lot of these people building services, building technology folks at building owners who maybe have a background in IT and now is straddling into the building services, building technology side. We're seeing budget starting to pull from a traditional IT budget to supplement, to complement products, technology, process, contracts on the traditional OT side, right? Again, not long ago, you installed a building automation system. IT had nothing to do with it. It pulled its own wire, right? 2-wire. It pulled its own conduits. It had its own people. And now we're saying, well, you need a port. Now we need that process on how to deal with upgrades and downgrades and cybersecurity firewalls. So we're starting to see that convergence a lot. Now, the real question is, are we going to get to full convergence the way that telephony happened in the 90s, right? Like telephony, there's no more department of telephony, right? It's just part of IT. We still today have building automation, building technology as a separate group with some budget. Are we going to see that in the next 10, 20, 50 years where it's just part of this global technology group?
That's an interesting question. I think the services that IT provides to support any function of a business, any departmental unit in a business are going to be the same for operations. There's still going to be an operations group that manages its specific applications, like other business units that manage their applications that might be specific to whatever it is they do. But like they have long-standing relationships with IT to have the cloud services and the physical network services and the laptops and the whatever else there is. Like those relationships are decades old in most things, and like relatively new in building automation, which is like really indicative of like building automation is behind, like always. That's a whole separate podcast we could talk about. But we're catching up now. But so I believe we're always going to have like building automation folks who are owners of those applications. that are necessary for, a part of the business operation, right? Whether
someone has to own it. Ultimately.
Yeah, somebody has to own it. But, and it gets into this idea of like, why is this happening? This convergence, and like, what does it enable? I think is like linked to what you're talking about, King.
Yeah.
So I believe, yes, we're still going to have these building automation folks, but we're going to have the services provided by IT that monitor and keep everything up and do backups and do the things that you'd expect from any business unit.
And I want to sort of roll that into the next question here, because for all the convergence going on and continuing on, I think largely for most organizations, we do still have separate, either the OT is still falling under our facilities people, and IT is still its own sort of monolith. So we have IT and OT teams who sit down at first project meetings. What are the sort of misunderstandings that you see that are usually the most common? And I'm sure this will be the part where other people that have worked on these projects will be listening and nodding their heads. And Doug, I wanted to sort of look at you about this one because of the work that you've done with Dartmouth and what I would call a pretty novel approach to sort of addressing those misunderstandings by creating a wholly unique situation. So maybe you can just sort of walk us through the solution you guys have come up with and the learnings that have come out of that for you guys.
I think it helps in that first meeting to have at least one representative that can kind of bridge the gap between the two sides, because I think, more often than not, people want to do a good job. They mean well. There are things that are lost in translation. There are issues they know of with certain, let's say, network architectures that they see as a bug that another group might see as a feature. And it's hard sometimes to get them together and talk about it without really showing each other how the magic works on either side, right? So I'd say one of the first gotchas is definitely the network side of things. A typical network engineer or just IT professional is going to find protocols like BACnet, network topologies like MSTP, or just daisy chains, generally speaking, to be very foreign to them, right? Appliances like BBMDs that rebroadcast across broadcast domains, right? That's a no-no. They teach you that in setting up subnets for a network engineer in the first place. So that's what I mean, like, one person's bug is another person's feature, right? So, the broadcast domain, for example, I think it's really helpful to be able to reframe it. Hey, network engineer, BACnet isn't just a protocol to enable transporting data across the network. It's actually, kind of an application layer in itself. We have products that are built around this protocol that enable different vendors to pull in each other's information right within a single tool. And to enable that, we have to enable broadcasts across these domains so we can discover each other's things. This is very similar to how MDNS works. And when you frame it like that, suddenly the network engineer goes, oh, okay, like I see what you're trying to do there. Weird way of doing it, but let's figure out how to make it work, right? The other kind of gotcha,
Doug, to just add to that, a big gotcha is if a building automation guy, lady walks in and goes, oh, I have 18 routers. Oh, your IT engineer is going to put a big kibosh on that conversation very quickly, but not realizing that in the world of BACnet, a router is not an IP router. It's like one of those nomenclature language, big, no-nos kind of thing. And so having someone like you can bridge the gap and go, well, hold on. This conversation of router is really a gateway. It's just a translation device. It can be quite scary.
The other gotcha I've seen a lot is when having a Windows XP machine is a feature, right? A tool. Like I have to have this in order to service this really old thing, right? And the IT professional is like, oh gosh, this is a security nightmare. We can't let it on the network. My approach to things like that is, okay, well, don't use the Windows XP as your personal machine. Use it like a tool, right? It doesn't need to be on the network anymore, right? Easy problem solved. But it's really like getting people to like genuinely sit down, that's the first step. So if you're doing that, you're already doing more than some teams are. We hear a lot of stories where people just don't talk to each other, and that's the worst thing you can do. But get in the same room, talk to each other, hash it out, whiteboard it, create visuals so people can extract meaning from the words instead of just talking past each other. So I'd say that's been Dartmouth's kind of approach to it, is get smart people in a room, mash up ideas, talk it out. Campus services specifically has really focused on the culture that we're building. So, through that process, we've been able to build an integrated automation program and team, have a working group, we have a steering committee, getting all those people in one room, working through hard problems. Like, that's how you really solve these tricky situations, and that's how you scale.
Jim, I see you nodding your head as well. Is that sort of a similar situation that you've encountered?
Yes. I mean, I believe that it's mostly a vernacular problem, right? And people don't know how to speak each other's vernacular to actually communicate the situation. And it's like the examples Doug was using. So yeah, it's I find now that there's really not much resistance anymore. Like maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was still some resistance from both sides of the coin, IT and OT, to just even engaging. But now it's taken as, we got to do it. Maybe I don't understand it, but we understand we have to do it. So let's start from that perspective.
Yeah, I think we probably all agree on that. Is that probably the first principle now at this point is we have to. At this point, we all see this convergence is not something we can stave off for another 10 or 20 years because we just don't feel like doing it.
Right.
I'd like to add to this topic, though. I think one of the biggest thing, if we have IT folks here who will be listening to this recording, is that in the world of building automation, in the world of OT, it's very rare that you don't have baggage. It's so that Windows XP comment that Doug just said there, it is a reality. And it's because in the majority of the cases, we're working with things, with buildings, with systems that have been around for 40 years, 50 years. We have to maintain these systems for a long, long time. These chiller plants, these power plants have been built way before anyone moved into these buildings. It was probably 18 tenants before you. We have to understand that there's this baggage that we have to deal with. It's just a reality, right? You cannot walk in and say, what's this serial connection? Rip it out. Like, we don't want that. What do you mean you have a daisy chain? What do you mean you need a Windows XP? We need that level of understanding that this industry has been around for a long time and is going to continue to be here for a long time. We're getting that change, but I think the few cases I am seeing that friction still today is when one group or another group is worried about the perception that they're creating, and it's just got to be honest with what I want.
I think I'm seeing that whereas those issues of my Windows XP machine and these other things that are like, I'm protecting them as a OT professional, as a facilities person, that's kind of how the mentality used to be. Now I'm seeing that actually shift to, I don't want to hold the risk of this. And I want IT professionals who understand to come help me address this. And oh, by the way, maybe I can get funding to do things that are going to reduce risk for the organization that I haven't been able to advocate for. Oh, we got to upgrade this system because it's on Windows XP on some isolated network. And everybody's like, I don't care. But if you get IT involved, I guarantee they're going to be like, hey, how do we get rid of that? What's the plan? How do we elevate this as a critical security risk? Because we just did our audit and we're getting those out of there. And we have a lot of clients now who the upgrade work that everybody knew they wanted to happen from the facilities side, from the OT side, is being driven by cyber and IT, because they're saying we're no longer going to tolerate this isolated risk.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the roles and roles that still sort of exist. I had a bit of an example here. Say a controller drops out off the network, 11 p.m. It's Saturday night. In this sort of converged environment that we're all moving towards, who's getting the first call? now at these points? Is it the IT team? Is it pager duty kicking off? Is it a controls contractor? Is it a facilities person who's on call? How are we drawing those boundary lines, so it's not turning into a bunch of finger pointing?
I've got a perspective on this, which is for OT, I don't believe that you should ever have network dependency. So if a controller goes offline of a air handler or VAV or something like that in the HVAC system, or something that's feeding information into that system, even across the network, it's got to be able to still operate without that dependency. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, but that's the nature of controls. And so good controls design will always make sure that, so the question really becomes like, does anybody need to know at 11 p.m. Or is it okay? Right. And there's a difference between it stopped working, the controller itself stopped working. Okay, that we might actually have a physical problem, versus I can't see the information from that controller because of a network issue. It's the facilities folks who are going to notice first.
That's right. Yeah.
It should be that everything's still operating.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're noticing is, I got an alarm, a low priority alarm that a device is offline, but I'm certain that it's still working because that's been tested. Now, I think it's interesting when I look at things like clinical operations, and you say, well, what happens when my MRI goes offline? And that's two different business units, right, who are going to handle those things with an IT convergence, right?
Right.
So
these
I
things,
think,
but these things do happen. And these situations do arise. And so I guess the question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're suggesting like, not only should these things be able to exist on their own and function on their own outside of certain issues, but there should be a plan in place for these things.
This is a general statement, but how I like to approach these things is with the phrase, the pain index. And if you're not familiar with it, it's those that are most responsible for fixing the problem should be closest to the pain, essentially, right? So let's say, for instance, that this controller is periodically going offline, online, but you're kicking out the notification to the IT team who can't actually deal with it. It's some physical layer issue with the piece of hardware itself. Now you're just in this uncomfortable position where the IT people are getting annoyed, and, maybe the OT people haven't responded in a timely fashion according to the IT people. So, I think you really want to put the people that can solve the problem closest to the alarms that are actually notifying them.
Without naming names, walk us through an integration where things didn't work. Where there was a situation where IT and OT either weren't talking, weren't agreeing, or, as we mentioned previously, maybe it was a vocabulary issue. What was the root cause, and what was eventually sort of the solution? How did you go about fixing that?
I have a lot of battle scars from dealing with failed integrations at this point. When I first started getting involved on the OT side with BACnet specifically, Ping was actually really helpful in this, by the way. Ping taught me a lot of what I know about BACnet, and then I just kind of took it from there. We had a major controls vendor who was having trouble integrating with a lighting system, pretty common, Wi-Fi hub gateway style lighting system. And really just got my feet wet on BACnet and troubleshooting these types of issues. But hey, I've done, PCAP captures before. I've used Wireshark. So, what's the problem? I'm just going to figure it out. So it wasn't quick to figure it out, but we did eventually figure it out. And it did come down to taking Wireshark captures. This integration is one of the first I troubleshooted. It's also one of the reasons I have really pushed internally and been vocal kind of in the industry about running OT networks like we do IT networks. So I am kind of the anti-daisy chain, anti-ring person here, unless you have a really good reason to do so. You got to do some retrofit or some other reasons. because for this integration, the reason I was able to troubleshoot it effectively is because I had the ability to run simultaneous network captures on both of the nodes that were impacted. And what I like to do at the end of the day is just be able to point the finger the right direction. So not this, not this, not this, or some combination. It's like, it's your fault. Here's why, and you're going to fix it. That's what it means to get down to a level of specificity that there's no BS. Like, we know what the problem is. We're willing to help you figure it out. Let's just get it done.
I'll go next and let Jim take us home. I have a good story. Again, won't name any names, but a very large organization with fairly deep pocket. Their building automation system was not performing, and let me call it out. Their graphics were very slow to load, and had got to a pain threshold. It's an organization that runs fairly critical services. I'm not sure how the decision was made, but IT was brought into the picture. I said they dropped the hammer. They spent close to $1 million to rip out the entire. They had a separated, they had a isolated OT network. Now it was still operated by IT, but it was an OT network, and in their case, because of they really needed that separation of data down to the physical layer, that made sense. They ripped everything out. They put the new one in. They powered the whole thing up, and the BAS system got worse. So they just spent $1 million, new cable, new switches, beautiful stuff, right? Top of the line things. Problem got worse. Why did it get worse? Because basically they made a highway bigger, but didn't make the exit any bigger. So it just flooded into these backnet routers. The backnet routers actually choked more than before the upgrade. That the intention was right, but because the understanding wasn't there to understand what was the root cause, and they just said the pain threshold was so high, let's just do it. And by the way, that's when we got brought in and we found what was causing it. But the broadcast storm was so bad that in the old network, the broadcasting was dampened by a slower network, and by making the network faster, it actually made it worse. So just a good example. Yeah.
One that I'll bring in is from a new construction project. We do a lot of new construction work, and that takes a lot of planning, right? Because you're about to bring on a lot of devices, lots of opportunity to get it right? And so this particular project, there was a lot of good planning, good coordination, collaboration between the design and kind of facility related systems, OT systems folks, to do the right thing in terms of how these devices were going to get on the network, security reviews of hardware, software, right? These are all best practices for bringing these devices onto the Convergence network. And then one of the pieces of hardware, is a large piece of switch gear, showed up to the site, and it was going to have a network drop, right? And what was discovered? It had its own little unmanaged switch inside of it, right? Which is like major no-no for like a HIPAA compliant network, right?
Right.
And so they ended up having to roll back and do a serial connection to that device, because it was the only way to keep the network sanitized, right? But the lesson learned was really, when you're doing these submittal reviews of all this equipment that's going to show up during these construction projects, IT has to do really deep reviews of what's actually going to be installed for anything that has a network port on it, right? A drop. And since then, we really got a much better process for how we, this could be hundreds or thousands of pieces of equipment. So it's a lot of work now, but it has to happen to understand all these potential vulnerabilities. And we've caught a lot of things now, like metering cabinets, where it's like, oh yeah, we always put this little switch in here. And you're like, no switch, we'll handle it. Like to Doug's point, like, we're going to home run everything. We don't want your switch. Like, you guys can talk across our switch. So that's an interesting lesson learned on that one.
Security policy. And then it seems to be one of the biggest sort of headbutt points between IT and OT. In IT, the classic priority for IT, it's usually confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It's keeping the data from leaking is usually one of the most important things. In OT, we're looking at almost the opposite there, with availability being the most important. We need those systems to keep running, especially if we're talking about occupancy sensors or elevator banks or those sorts of things. How do teams actually write one policy that both of these teams can live with when we have seemingly conflicting priority order here? Ping, you're smiling. Well, what do you think?
Boy, I mean, that's a loaded question.
I'm sure it is. And we love our spicy answers here.
Yeah, loaded question. And I'll call myself out. I'm not an expert here. I know enough to be dangerous, but there's amazing resources in our community. In the last 15, 20 years, there's been quite a few experts in cybersecurity, really dedicating their time to our industry, to our what we need to practice, and so they really would be the one to chime in here. But I think the number one thing is to define the business priorities, just like what you highlighted there, because writing a policy without understanding what you're trying to achieve, locking everything down, and not be able to use it, it might not be an option. Saying that every controller needs to use 802.1x for authentication on the port might not be available, because now you might lock yourself down to a vendor that you may or may not want to work with, for example. So I think these business priorities is the number one thing, and then writing those policies. And I would just add that writing the policies is actually not the difficult thing, is enforcing the policies, doing the tabletop exercise to make sure that the policies are actually followed. But it also needs a really careful mitigation plan. So understand that you can't get to where you want to get immediately, and it may take multiple years, because again, these systems, the life cycle of these systems are significantly longer than IT systems. And so going in, understanding the business priorities, understanding this can take time, and it's one step at a time to get to the end. Well, actually, we'll probably never get to the end, but just continuously improve. We could do a whole session on this.
And we probably will.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And actually, I think I might expand this and bring in what was the next question on the list here is closely related to security is those actions like patching, remote access, change management. And again, these are things where there's probably going to be a lot of clashing. So I'll include those as well, Jim and Doug. Where are the compromises? How do we come to a happy place where everybody's, I don't want to say happy, but at least can live with the compromise?
I think that's where we do have some growing up to do on the protocol side of things. Like BACnet SE has been slow to be being adopted by the OEMs, to be totally frank. I wonder sometimes if it's too little too late, because you can see some vendors have started to go in different directions with their own proprietary protocol running over TLS. But let's be honest, like TLS, encryption in transit, it's been around for a very long time. It's been a solved problem. And it is one of the biggest challenges that I see with protocols like BACnet IP, Modbus, et cetera. So that needs to be solved quickly at an industry level. We need to make sure that we have interoperability with BACnet SC. Like that's just step number one. We really need to nail the authentication and authorization problems as well, which I believe to be coming in future revisions of BACnet SC, in addition to what's already being solved by that. But I think generally, like, this industry has missed a lot of opportunities. If you look at what's being done with like containerization, templatization in IT, Ansible, Terraform, IT infrastructure has become commoditized to the point where I can write it once and redeploy it many times very quickly. And in the OT world, these controllers, these configurations, the servers we set up are very precious to us. And if something goes wrong with them, it might take days or weeks to stand them back up. And I think on the cybersecurity side, that puts us in a really bad position, because when something goes wrong, we don't have an opportunity to just rebuild it from nothing and see if that fixes the problem. I think we need to adopt more patterns and practices from the IT side to solve some of that, both from a cybersecurity perspective and for some of the other reasons you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to the collaboration and communication, because if the IT and facilities teams, I try not to use the word OT, but if they're working together to address the needs, define availability, define requirements and expectations and escalations and all these things, like if those conversations are happening, then it will be known, right? And you'll be able to work through problems. But, we've got lots of examples where growing pains have to happen to get there, right? Where we have centrally, managed supervisory servers across national portfolios that are getting automatically patched and are getting accidentally pushed applications that they're supposed to not get, like a certain application that conflicts, right, with that's on their standard VM architecture that conflicts with the supervisory application, right? So those challenges have been had by other systems for years, and you always have a non-production environment and you test these things, and there's that workflow exists, but it is new to building automation. So we've run into a lot of problems where we didn't have good coordination. It really just comes down to sitting down, writing it down, expectations, who's doing what, and working that out.
And I want to jump into the first of our last two questions here, because that's a perfect segue. Something we wrote about, something we wrote about here at Optigo was that concept of collaborative training, the idea of putting your staff responsible for OT, your systems integrators, and the IT team in the same room to learn those tools and those workflows together, rather than providing training to the individually siloed groups. So, Jim and Doug, have you seen something like this where you work or on projects that you worked on? And for our listeners, what would be one concrete move that, say, an IT leader or a facilities or an OT manager could make right now to start closing those gaps or enable that sort of idea of collaborative training?
To answer your first part of that question, like, no, I don't think I have really seen that. It does tend to be, well, I would say it's almost like IT folks and OT folks are training each other,
right?
But they're not being trained together. Right? It's like the nuance there, right? Because,
and that can be important. Yeah, important.
Yeah. I think what's been interesting to watch, like for my team, right, who are system integrators, the skill set that they need to succeed has evolved, and they all have to be good network engineers now. Like, they have to really understand what's happening on the networks, or they really can't be successful. They can't wait and not understand all the flows of that information and how these protocols and everything interact. Like, it's a prerequisite now from a systems integration perspective. And I think that's probably slower to be adopted on the user side, like the folks who are the operators being expected to have a deeper knowledge of network and those things for their own abilities to manage their systems. And in terms of like, what's the one thing that folks can do now? And I think it's just to make sure that there's clear commitment to the future state, right? That like the future state is, we expect this outcome of how devices are going to be on our network. And everyone is responsible for working together to achieve that outcome. So I think having a very clear mandate architecturally, like everybody has to be aware of that. And then that will be the basis by which people can collaborate and train and coordinate to achieve that outcome.
I love your passion, your optimism in it. But I think one of the key difficulty in our industry is that so many of our systems are governed by the construction phase of a site, and the business incentive of those delivering these systems, but many of them don't have a long-term incentive an incentive on the long-term quality of the system. There's a very much of a bid spec, lowest bidder wins it. Get to the finish line as quick as you can, hand off the keys, and then just get out, right? I think, and I would like,
if the owner has a mandate and they have their standards and they have specifications, that gets driven into the construction projects. And that's a lot of the work we do.
That's right.
Is someone said it, like, you got to do the validation, you got to review the design, you got to review the submittal, you got to make sure that's what's installed in the field and how it all comes together. Like, commissioning in the industry has been around for a long time, from a mechanical system or, lighting control system. We have to commission the network components of everything across the entire network, including OT. You can dictate that during construction. And by the way, you better dictate that. We've had controllers get rejected. Like, we can't use this controller because it went up for security review, and unless they address these issues in the controller, we're not letting that on our network. So sorry.
Yeah.
Find a new controller. Yeah. Like, that has happened. That's great. That's a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah.
From my perspective, like, pain in the ass. Sorry, guys. It's like, it's a kick in the butt to the building automation industry of, like, we're not going to let you get away with this crap anymore. And I think it just starts with the owner saying, we own it, and we're not going to let our vendors drive it anymore.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out here to episode 2 of our podcast, where we discussed life after commissioning, and episode 3, which came out 2 weeks ago, where we did a nice deep dive with Nate Benish about BACnet SC and where BACnet SC is owning. So it's great that all these topics are coming up, and how we can all see that they're very connected to each other.
And so I think if you started with the hard things, let's say the capital projects, the designs, the standards, in some ways that is harder because there's real money involved. Things can go sideways pretty quickly.
A lot of stakeholders.
A lot of stakeholders, a lot of people convinced without a lot of evidence, perhaps. One of the things that I've liked is really focusing on the operations of existing building stock, and how do we take the problem that the OT team is seeing or the IT team is seeing, sit down and solve it. From the perspective of building trust. Like, that's how you build trust, right? What you can do is break things down into small, everyday problems, maybe things that people see as very painful for them specifically, and solve it. For example, like certificates. I think this industry is very scared of certificates, but if you grab an IT person, they'd probably dealt with certificates at some point, and they would be delighted to tell you how PKI works. They would probably talk your ear off, right? And so you could maybe take a problem that the OT person is seeing, BACnet SC, or with this specific Box S setup, sit down with them, help them, right? And now you've just solved the problem for that person. You've built a little bit of trust. And now you can say, all right, look, we see this is problem XYZ, and we could prevent it from happening again by putting this into our design guidelines. And I think that kind of feedback loop is really powerful. It builds the trust on your team. You can still get that feedback back into your construction guidelines, perhaps, depending on what it is. Obviously, certs, maybe not. And so it's really building like a solid foundation. I will echo that, you got to get this stuff into the standards, because that's the stop the bleeding moment. If you don't do that, you're going to keep having operational issues to solve.
And this is, okay, our last question. And I feel like we've touched on a lot of this. And so this is really just an exercise in bringing it all back together here. But if you two gentlemen were advising a facilities director, an IT director about where to start working together on a new relationship, what would you tell them about how to structure that? And I don't want to limit your options, but are we talking like a full merger team, a joint working group where there are clear boundaries, or is it, and I don't think anybody would agree with this. It's keep it the way it is. Two groups fully separate who coordinate through a liaison, and each person sort of stays in their own corner. How would you suggest them to start off? What's step one in that structure?
Gosh, all right. So I am the omnipresent IT director. I have unlimited budget and I'm dealing with bad culture issues and teams that are fighting with each other. So that's the scenario I'm setting up.
Never happens. Never happens.
Yeah. In all seriousness, I'm really food motivated. So if you sat me down in a room with another person and said, hey, here's lunch. Interesting problem that Mark over here was just telling me about that I feel like you've run into before, Doug. Why don't you guys eat pizza and talk about it? I genuinely feel like you'd have some decent outcomes. The maybe pre-meeting I would have before that is if you have some personalities that need to be managed, like genuinely need to be managed. I'm not generally like a touchy-feely, like maybe you should do some HR trainings things, but sometimes people do need a little bit of training on how to talk to each other. I feel like I've learned over my IT career how to talk to people. I was a really hot-headed, I'm always right, we should do it my way type of person. And I've learned to change how I'm communicating, not to go for the immediate win of that battle, but like thinking long-term, like what is, the war that I'm trying to fight? What is the objective I'm trying to achieve? And it's really changed how I talk to people. And so teaching people how to talk to each other is really helpful. Putting them in a room, doing hackathons. We really like doing that. Take a hard problem, put people in a room, do smart things. It's fun. And when you kind of take the pressure off a little bit, you don't come into the meeting perhaps with a problem to solve, but you let the two individuals or the group organically come up with it. Now it's kind of this like shared idea, shared problem to solve. They get together, have some fun, and they build a little bit of a relationship. It does really depend on the individuals and what they're willing to do. But I think that's how I'd approach it if I was trying to foster it as an IT or OT director of sorts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what I'm going to say is probably similar. I would say it takes leadership, and clear leadership and vision is where it starts. And that can lead to the how based on teams and personalities and these things that Doug's talking about. But you have to have leadership and you have to have curiosity, because the curiosity is, how are things working for you? How can, we learn from each other? How, what's working and not working in your world. And so I think that's super important. And then the safety bit, I think Ping was speaking to this earlier, like you got to be able to air out the laundry. Like everybody's got things, from these years of whatever had happened in the past. Mm-hmm. It's nobody's fault that there's that Windows server and there's all these network vulnerabilities on the OT side. Like it's not any one person's fault. Maybe it's a vendor's fault. And we can throw them under the bus. But like, so like structurally, if you really want to get down to like, what does that mean? I don't think you would start there, right? It's like, what is the structure that's needed to support? That is going to come later after you have some engagement to say what's really needed and the size of your OT systems. I know I have seen very successful groups that are still separate, but I've also seen really good solutions where there are dedicated IT professionals within those organizations that lead those efforts because of the scale of the system and speeds and things that are needed. And so I think it depends on the organization and what, what those goals are and what the complexity of the systems you're dealing with are.
It sounds like headspace seems like the core here is to start out with the right mindset and the acceptance that this is going to happen and the headspace of like, we have to work together. We're going to work together and I want this to work.
Yeah.
And it sounds like your answers, your structures can almost grow organically as long as you're maintaining that willingness to work together. And it doesn't always have to start or spring to life from an SOW. Yeah.
I want to add to that in terms of first step. My big recommendation, the sometimes when I meet people who are just starting their journey, get out there. Like go to conferences. We unfortunately don't have a lot of conferences in our community where you can connect with people like Doug and Jim. But there are some. Get out there. Those who are getting out are already hungry, curious to talk about this. How does IT and OT work together? IT and facility. Call your neighbor. If you're a facility manager yourself, call your neighbor, whoever it is. If you're a university, I'm sure you can call the university next door. If you're a building owner, call another building owner, ask them what they are doing. And they might not, you might find that they're not doing any more than you. If they are, learn from them. That's my first thing. Get out there, talk to people. You're going to come back energized. You're going to have all these ideas. Some of them will be good. Some of them won't be good. But that's how I would say first step. Like just, if you want a list of people you can reach out to, get on LinkedIn, connect with us, connect with Doug or Jim. I mean, we all want to help each other grow. It's going to make us better. But I do find that this community is a little bit too inward. We look to ourselves within our organization and not outward enough.
And on that note, Jim, where can people find you?
You could reach out to me on LinkedIn. For sure. I'm not an avid social media person, just my personality, but you can also go to our website, alturassociates.com, and get in touch with us that way. We're helping lots of large organizations figure out how to navigate these questions and standards, and enterprise thinking is a big part of what we're bringing to this from an OT perspective. Is how do I stop treating this as a project by project solution and a truly enterprise standard that allows me to treat it and get the value of an enterprise system. So we'd love to keep chatting about that.
Beautiful. And Doug, how can people find you?
Well, I try to put myself out there, but same on the social media stuff. I'm only on LinkedIn and happy to chat with people on there. But if you for people watching this, if you put yourselves out there, go to industry trade shows, participate online discussions, lists, serves group lists. I'm often on them and willing to exchange ideas. I do also try to put out some of my ideas as literal code. So I do try to share what I've learned in places like GitHub as well.
Beautiful.
Buy pizza for Doug.
Yes, I will join you gentlemen anytime for pizza. I'm fully down with that. But with that, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we barely scratched the surface on this, but I do love that we ended up with it. It's so much of a people sort of driven process, right? And it's about having the right attitudes to start with. All right, have a great one, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You guys, Doug. I'll see you next week.
How to Handshake was created by Optico Networks. You can find us on YouTube and at optico.net. Tune in 2 weeks for the next episode.